You're listening to the DC Real Estate Podcast, the podcast where we focus exclusively on all things local to the DMV area. Local investors, local knowledge, local experts. Our journey starts now.
Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of the DC Real Estate Podcast. We took last week off, but now we're rolling again. My name is Russell Brazil. I am an associate broker with Arla Real Estate.
I'm Sarah Frank. I am also an agent with Arla and also on the District Invest team with Russell.
And I'm Ron Gallagher, and I'm retired.
And today we brought Ron in because we are talking about a deal we're trying to take down with Ron. And all of Ron's deals that we execute tend to be fairly complicated, particularly on the financing side. And so we really need to get together and brainstorm. And I said, well, if we're going to brainstorm how to take down this property, let's go ahead and record our brainstorming session so you guys can kind of see the process we go through in trying to figure out how to get one of these complicated deals taken down.
Right. You might experience an epiphany. This is how my mind works. We're going to document how my mind works.
Exactly. So last week, I think you texted me middle of the night. Maybe there was some illicit substances involved.
How dare you?
But you were like, I have figured out how we're going to get this property. And let's talk first about what the property is, because it is a very unique and complicated property. And I think in describing the property, people might understand why it is complicated to finance.
Right. So the seller is a gentleman who sold me my property in College Park, right by the metro station there in College Park. And this particular property was burned out. I think he bought it as a shell at some point, and then he just divided it up into
the property that you own.
The property that
you want to buy?
Subject property.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yep, the one next door. So, he just divided it up into units. There's no common area. If you walked inside, it looks like an apartment building. The problem is that it's in a residentially zoned
single unit residential
single
zone
family, right? R55. And so commercial lenders aren't going to lend on that. Residential lenders aren't going to lend on it because FHA guidelines say that you can't lend on a rooming house. So it's just in this purgatory. And the seller, Alan is his name, he even admitted to me several times, like, maybe I've created a building that I can't actually sell.
So yeah, let's dig down this a little bit more. So it is a single family zoned area, and legally this property is a single family property. But when you walk in the front door, it is like a 5-unit multifamily property with 5 separate distinct units, each with living rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, and bathrooms. Each unit has its own, except each unit does not have a stove, right? Because a single family home can only have a single stove. So only one of the units has a stove.
Exactly.
But other than that, they are essentially 5 separate apartments, and well-sized ones too.
Yeah. And so the challenge is, because it's the same challenge we faced with the College Park property that I bought.
Yeah.
But this is going to be a bigger loan. And
right. So the last property we bought from Alan, which was the same sort of thing, that was about let's just call it a $500,000 property, and it was bringing in about $5,000 a month in rent. This property is going to be closer to $800,000 because it brings in $8,000 a month rent, because it's substantially bigger units than the one you have next door.
Right. I have a lot of studios, and these are like huge 1-bedrooms.
Yeah. So pretty expensive property, definitely not cheap. It's a DC priced property in College Park.
Right. So when I'm going to all these lenders trying to get a loan and financing on this funky property, they were already, no one said yes, except for Eastern Savings Bank. But, I'm not going to have it. But that was like a $300,000 loan. It's going to be difficult to find a lender, even more difficult to find a lender for a bigger loan like this.
Yeah, because we can't do a single family loan conventional on this, because an appraiser walks in and says this does not meet the underwriting requirements of what a single family property is, right? Even though it's zoned that way, it is 100% legal in the use of it, but Fannie Mae won't loan on it. Conversely, most commercial lenders don't want to do what they call rooming houses, especially if it doesn't have a rooming house license, which this doesn't, because the legal use is single family, but we are using it legally. There are only 5 unrelated people on the property, which is what county law and College Park law calls for. So the use is legal, but it just doesn't meet what a commercial lender wants typically, or what the conventional lenders want.
Right. So it's super clever. Alan saying that, I think I've created a property I can't sell. That's the byproduct of this super clever strategy, which is making tons of cash flow by creating units in these single family homes that just don't have a stove. Yeah. But you can get, instead of what you get, I don't know what you get in College Park for a room, $500-$600. Now you're getting the market rate for a 1-bedroom in a studio in College Park is, like $1,300 a month. So he can get that. And then, sure, 10% of his tenant pool gets upset that there's no stove because they're a cook or whatever. But most of these people are, college people or whatever. They're not, that you get a hot plate, a toaster oven, a microwave. You can put it all together and you can cobble together your own stove equivalent. So as long as you're not a chef looking for a chef's kitchen, this is really a super clever strategy to make.
Yeah, so it'll rent for a little bit less than a true 1-bedroom apartment because it doesn't have the stove, but substantially more than just a room rental situation.
Exactly.
So really unique property, but very, very hard to finance.
Right, because Alan bought all these properties and held all these properties without a mortgage. So he really is admittedly naive to the financing part of it. So that's where it became our responsibility to try to figure out how to finance this. And we just realized with the first College Park property that I tried to buy that was set up like this rooming house situation, it's nearly impossible. When I say that I called 100 internet lenders and whatever, and they would all tell the same story. We went down this road with another lender just recently. They all say, yeah, I don't see any problem with it because it's such an anomaly. It's a case that they're never going to see. It's like going to the doctor and you have some rare disease. It was like they're all going to say, yep, we can handle this. We know exactly what to do. And then when you start getting into the guidelines, you realize, okay, this it's just not going to work.
Is he not open to seller financing at all? Did you guys go down that road with
He's 70 something and he's just trying to divest and get out of it.
Additionally, the seller, he's a rare coin collector.
Right. He doesn't have kids. So it's like, what are you going to do with these millions of dollars you've accumulated?
And what he wants to do is he is building up this coin collection. I forget what he collects specifically, but his collection of these rare coins are ranked, what is it, like 10th in the world of this specific collection. And he wants to keep moving up before he dies.
So he was saying that with the proceeds from the sale of the first College Park property, when he sold it to me, he said that this will allow him to buy more coins that will bring him to the number 2 slot or something. And you can laugh about this, but I hesitate to make fun of anything that Alan does because, like I've said this before, Alan is me in 30 years. Yeah. Like he is just, we have so much in common. If you remember at the settlement table, he was worried that the title company didn't escrow enough money for the water bill that comes out quarterly. So he pulls, some cash out of his pocket, but it's in a money clip. And I'm like, Alan, look at this. And then I pull out of my pocket my money clip because I don't carry a wallet around either. I just carry my ID and some cash. It was that moment that I realized I'm looking across the table at me in 30 years. Yeah. So I'm sure I will be a rare coin collector when I'm 70.
We all have the things we like to spend money on. As I look across the room, I've got my wrestling action figures over there, right? We all have sort of ridiculous things we like to spend money on. For Alan, it's ridiculously expensive coins.
Which, if they appreciate in value, what are you going to...
Yeah. But that brings us back to seller financing, probably not up his alley, because then he wants large sums of money to go buy these coins.
But you do make a good point, though, because back in 2018, when we were buying the first College Park property, it was an absolute 100% no when we would... Because it was, like, really our only option.
Right.
And then... now that he's seen how hard it is and he's tried to engage other buyers and, they talk about like, you just got to wait for the right buyer or whatever. I'm the right buyer. I'm the buyer for this property. Alan has found me and I'm the one to buy this property. So it's our responsibility to figure out how to do it. But now that the realization is starting to sink in, he's been trying to sell this second College Park property for like
2 years now, right?
Now, right. And I think this is starting to set in. So that was actually part of the equation. The way that I thought it all out is that I need about a loan for about $300,000, and maybe he would carry that back. And I was
if we can get him a large enough big sum of money, maybe he carries some of it back,
right?
Or maybe we even are able to negotiate the price down because of how funky it is to get this sold,
right? But probably not. And also, I think we're getting 2019 prices. And
that is true. So I do think
he hasn't asked for an increase. So
this is our valuation of the building is based on the rent to price ratio that we bought the last one at. And what year did we buy that?
It was December 20th, 2018.
So. Yeah. So we're buying this basically at a 2018 valuation, even though it's more expensive. So it's a good deal for us on the buy side.
Great deal. And one of the ways that I thought about seller financing would be if he carried that $300,000 back for me in seller financing. I don't need the cash from the College Park property. So
because you have enough cash to live on currently.
I have enough cash flow to live on currently. So that would all just be like bonus money. So since I don't need it in 2022, I could make an agreement with Alan that I'm going to pour all the profits back into him. I'm going to pay him off as fast as possible. So if I'm making $5,000 a month off this property, you got to think that maybe it'll be a little, my cash flow will be a little higher if I'm the way that, and we'll talk about this in a second, but the way that I'm cobbling together all these funds, my loan payment won't be as big as it might be if I took out a $800,000 commercial loan. Yeah. So I just pour that $5,000 in cash flow. Every month I give it back to Alan. And then, in maybe 3 or 4 years,
you'd have the whole thing paid back.
And that's the worst case scenario. Yeah. I'm going to come up with some money somewhere along the lines within the next 2-3 years that I'll just be able to pay him off.
Yeah. So let's talk about how we financed the first one, because we've alluded to the fact that you called 100 lenders, I called 100 lenders, and these rooming house situations are just impossible to finance. And I think we found one rooming house lender was like 50% LTV, and we didn't have 50% down then. But we went to Eastern Savings Bank, and Scott Freetag is who we use there. He's an awesome, awesome lender. And Scott loves to do these weird loans, particularly for a buyer that has maybe a good but unique financial situation. So Ron has lots of equity in other properties, right? So he has a net worth wise has a substantial net worth, right? But were you working at the time? I can't remember. So you were working. But these properties are unfinanceable, but they're huge cash cows. And Ron had all these other properties. So to Scott, Ron looks like a good person to lend to, because he's like, all right, he's got millions of dollars in these other homes. How can we make this work? And Scott was able to make it work. Maybe not with the most best terms we would love, but he was able to get it done.
We bought the property. In the end, we got the job. It took the contract that the property was under contract for 5 months. We did get it done. I bought the property. Now, I paid off that loan within a year, which is the same thing I assume I would do with a seller financing with Alan, because I didn't like the terms of it. I mixed and matched my mortgages and put a mortgage on a property that I own free and clear, and then paid off.
So if I remember correctly, I think we had a 25-year amortization on that loan.
That's correct.
5.5% interest rate, which was a lot a few years ago, not a lot today.
Right.
And a 3-year call, right?
Right. So the 3-year call is what I was worried about. You asked if I was working at the time. I was. And my concern was, it was basically the 3-year call wasn't, it was basically, you're going to have to
reapply for the loan in 3 years.
Right. We're going to reevaluate everything. And we might not, Scott was trying to reassure me, like, look, if a loan is performing and you're paying it as agreed every month, why would we as an investment bank pull that loan out? But there's not to say that they're not going to say, okay, everything's going good, but you know what? We're going to charge you 8% or whatever this next 3 years or whatever. And I knew that I was going to be quitting my job within the within the next year. So I didn't know it was going to be within the next year, but I knew that my end game was that when that 3-year call happens, I was not going to be employed. So I was going to lose 6 figures of income, and they look at your global cash flow. And if your global cash flow was suddenly going to be $100,000 a year less because you were retiring. Exactly.
Maybe that impacts whether they requalify you. So
Exactly.
I get that anxiety.
So I was very concerned about the 3-year call. Now, if we put the mortgage on there or whatever, if I'm qualifying for the loan now, then I don't see my position changing for the negative in 3 years. In 3 years, I hope to have even more money, but at the time in 2018, when I was working and I knew I was going to quit and the end game was retirement, the 3-year call was scary.
Yeah. So we ended up paying that off. And in fact, I think, if I remember correctly, we used you get a condo in Southwest, right? And I don't know if was that losing money every month at that point?
Probably like losing $1,000.
Yeah. So we took that asset that was losing money, and it was losing money because we'd pulled cash out of it, right? But we sold that off in unique circumstances, took that cash, and then paid off the College Park house.
So
I think
I did use so I call it like the Monopoly game where you mix and match. And Russell and I talk about this all the time. Like, you have to look at everything holistically. You have to look at the whole portfolio, your whole, what can you take a quick loan out of your 401k to get $50,000 to, make the deal happen, and then you'll
pay it
back within 60 days, and there'll be no real consequences. Or you have to think of everything, your whole portfolio, and not just real estate.
And so while that one asset was losing a lot of money per month, owning that asset allowed you to do other things with your portfolio through the course of time.
Right.
But now the time had come to let it go.
Right. During the pandemic, my cash flow suffered, and if that's losing, it was an opportunity to optimize my portfolio. Like, okay, maybe if there was not pandemic times, I might have kept it around because, I was losing $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year, but it was appreciating on average $15,000 a year. So it's like, whatever.
This is a condo you'd bought for about $100,000 and sold for $400,000.
It was my very first condo that I bought when I was like 22. My very first foray into real estate. My very first property in Washington, D.C. when I'm becoming an adult. And I even moved back into it in 2016 when I moved back to D.C. after like a 9-year mini retirement in South America. So I love that condo. And now that's where the wharf is. It was one block from the $2 billion D.C. wharf project.
Now it's the hottest neighborhood in D.C.
Right. So, but anyway, the point is mix and match, take like Monopoly cards, think about where you can use your mortgages. And so I applied a mortgage to a property that I own free and clear to be able to pay off the College Park property and pay off that loan, the commercial loan, with the terms I didn't like, and specifically the 3-year call. So, but just to back up one other thing, everyone always talks about this. This is not the epiphany part of this podcast, but one of the things that Scott from Eastern Savings Bank told me, and this is, remember, the only lender that said yes, is he said there was something like the 3 C's that he lends on: credit, something else, and then character. And Russell had invited me to meet a real estate meetup in like Anne Arundel County. Remember, we were whatever. And then when everyone packs up and goes home, there was like 4 of us that just stayed super late, gabbing about real estate and whatever. And it was me, someone else, Russell, and Scott. And that was the day that I met Scott. That was long before we needed him for financing. But when we call him and engage with him, we could say,
remember we met you back in this day.
Exactly. Remember we were, hanging out after the podcast, after the meetup after hours, and after conversations with him, Scott had really good bedside manner. Like, he's like, just call me if you ever have any questions. There were times when he would chat with me for like an hour while I'm trying to, we're trying to figure out how we can make this work. And he was very patient with me. And I think during those conversations, he realized that, he could go to the board of directors. They had to have like meetings, and they have to like decide, because this is the portfolio lender. Like, this is their money from Eastern Savings Bank. So they had to Scott had to go pitch this loan to the board of directors to convince them that it was a good loan that they should fund. And I think those conversations with Scott made him realize that I fit at least the third C, which was character. And so it goes back to the networking thing and whatever.
Networking, relationships. And this is what a lot of people don't think about. How can I leverage the relationships I have with an individual? How can I leverage that and extend that out further to the relationships they have with other people, right? So you had a relationship with me, and I had a relationship with Scott. So you're leveraging to start my relationship with Scott in order to build your own with him.
Right.
And if we always start thinking sort of geometrically further, right? Think about it. That's why it's important who the professionals are that you work with, because you're getting access to these people's networks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to mention that because that was a part of it. Because if we would have called Scott totally out of the blue, already this loan is really sketchy.
We're talking about some wacky thing. He probably just blows you off if you hadn't met him before and established a relationship.
Right. So I think that was part of the reason why I didn't get a no right off the bat like we did with the other 100 lenders we called.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, yeah. And now, if we went up to Scott, and part of my equation for taking down this second College Park property is potentially going back to Scott and saying, hey, now that I own that College Park property free and clear, can we put, you've done it before. You've done your due diligence. We've put the loan on that property before. Can we put another loan on it now? Yep. Maybe that's how we get the $300,000. I call it cross-collateralization, where the bank isn't cross-collateralizing. You're doing it by putting the collateral up as, my property that I own free and clear, and the subject property, because what kills the deal on the subject property, if we get to this point, is the appraiser.
Yeah.
When the appraiser goes, he sees that it's a funky property and it's not financeable, and every deal dies. So if we never have to invite an appraiser into the house because I'm cobbling together the $800,000 that Alan wants for the property by putting a loan on a different property that I own, by cobbling together the other things that we're going to talk about, then we never have to send an appraiser to that house. So we're buying the subject property with the subject property never being the collateral.
Yeah. So let's dig into this, right? Because this is the whole point of it is, how are we going to cobble together the money to make this purchase from several different sources, it sounds like. Let's go through that plan and that logic and see what.
Sure. So it all starts.
See how convoluted it gets. The more convoluted it gets, usually means we're getting closer to making it happen.
So it all starts when the SBA sends me an email. Hey, do you want some more money for your EIDL loan? I didn't ask for it. I don't hear people clamoring for it. But sure, if you want to give me more money at 3.5% on a 30-year fixed, where I don't have to fill out much paperwork or whatever, sure, I'll take that.
That's funny because I just got the email where they were deferring. I was getting ready to pay back my EIDL loan. It just got deferred another 6 months.
I'm hoping this is not going to happen, but I'm hoping it's not going to happen because the economy is going to recover after the pandemic. But I would just love for them just to say, you know what, we're going to forgive the loan totally.
I think all of us that have these SBA and EIDL loans are hoping for that.
So let's all work together to make that happen.
Student loans first.
I don't have student loans, so I don't care about that. And I think college is overrated. So I don't want to encourage people to go to college. So that's a whole racket, but we can get into that in a separate podcast. So it's the SBA, and I'm like, okay, they're offering me $80,000 more. I uploaded my 2019 tax return and some document that I signed at the moment saying that my company is owned by me or whatever. I don't know. There's some affidavit that I had to sign. Upload those two documents. We'll see. My loan adjustment is being processed. I don't know. I'm assuming in like 2 weeks I'm going to have $80,000 in my account for uploading two documents. So then I'm starting to think, okay, now that I'm starting to get out of the quicksand of the pandemic, I have no vacancies right now. My deadbeat tenants are starting to either pay up, or we've gotten the rental assistance program from the county, or they've moved out. I've absorbed the loss and moved on with my life and put a paying tenant in there. So
yeah, so this is an important part, right? So your investment strategy leads to drastically higher cash flows, right? Doing this rent by the room strategy throughout most of DC, higher cash flows, but higher risk, right? We're not dealing with a high income family who's living there for 10 years, paying their rent every month. So you experience part of that risk, right? It happens, but now you're back to your portfolio being optimized and cash flowing properly.
I wouldn't say it's optimized, but I'm working towards that end. Yeah. So it will be optimized when the 92-year-old guy living in my College Park property is not paying $800 in rent. He's paying $1,300 or whatever, but that's not going to happen. So I always have at least one charity case in my tenant pool. But so it is riskier, but at the same time,
you're rewarded for that risk. You're making a lot more rent per property than I do.
You're rewarded for that risk. I would say almost the risk isn't the trade-off, it's the time. Yeah. It is much more management intensive. When you we were hanging out one night, Russell and I, and Russell mentioned something about maybe buying a row house in Columbia Heights and doing the rent by the room strategy. I just don't know if you have the patience for that.
The patience
Russell.
or the time, yeah.
Because the people are, the tenants are like, you got to be called in to be the referee every once in a while. From stuff as simple as, what are we going to set the thermostat to? Because the guy in the attic is going to be much hotter than the person in the basement. So, but it is a higher reward. And people talk about, real estate is get rich slowly. I was thinking about this the other day. I got rich pretty fast. I got rich. I turned in from like a lowly government employee to on personal capital right now. Like, I'm killing it. Like, now I understand.
Now you're a baller.
Yeah.
That's because you're like actually using your assets to buy more assets. Right. I think a lot of people don't really understand that, and why we push so hard for people to get into real estate investing. Because like when you were getting a mortgage on your income, that's not really a loan on a house. You're borrowing on your income. And that people don't get that. There's a difference between using the assets you already own to pay for things or taking out a loan from a bank on the income you're earning, because that could go away any second. So I think you're playing really smart and being creative.
Well, I also recently figured it out. Actually, I figured out everything. I figured out the secret of life. If we want to have a separate podcast, we can do it. But one thing I figured out recently, and this comes from poverty mentality, and my parents grew up in northern Maine in one of the poorest counties in the country, and we have this poverty. I've grown up with this poverty mentality where if you have a broken coffee mug and the handle's broken off, you got to save the coffee mug because you might be able to use it as a pencil holder or something to hold up the couch when one of the legs breaks or something. So I haven't fully processed it yet, but having that poverty mentality ingrained into me for 40 years, it allowed me to delay gratification and get to this point. But now that I'm at the point where the delay in gratification is over and it's now time to gratify, thank God I switched out of the poverty mentality just before I quit my job, which allowed me to buy a 4-level $1 million forever home in DC. If I didn't do that, I would have spent the whole pandemic in a basement apartment with tenants stomping above me. But I don't know how much of your audience comes from poor is maybe the wrong word, but
frugal.
Yeah.
Just like frugality. There's like abundance. Everyone pushes like having an abundance mindset. But if you got to save money, you got to save money, especially if you have houses to buy.
Right.
I think that it's almost an advantage to come from a background like that because you view money very differently from someone who grew up with
Definitely was an advantage during the buying process. Now that I've reached financial freedom, it's been a challenge for me to bust out of the poverty mentality. Yeah. But as I'm emerging from the poverty mentality also is like again, I haven't been able to articulate it perfectly because I haven't really fully processed it, but it's almost like you don't deserve it or you don't think, some poor, again, I don't think poor, we're more working class. My parents were state government employees, never making a whole lot of money, but it's not like we lacked anything, but we never had cable. You know what I mean? Like all my friends are watching MTV and stuff like that. And I've got the 3 channels that you got in Northern Maine, one of which is from Canada. So, it's just like, you just don't feel like you deserve it. Or like, if I tell you right now that I'm, $3 million on personal capital net worth, that's still surprising to me because like, you just don't think you can be a tri-millionaire when you're just this poverty mentality kid.
Well, it's funny because I saw one of your mindset changes in this area not that long ago, right? So we used to go to wrestling and we used to look for the seats that were the best.
This is you're doing.
Was the best value. And then I think I at one of these pro wrestling events I took you to, we sat in the first or the second row and you're like, this is fucking awesome.
Right. So now I don't do anything. My thing for sporting events is because Russell was like, oh, we got some NBA tickets. Do you want to go to the NBA game? And I'm like, this is going to sound really snobby, but where are the seats? Because I don't do anything but floor seats now. If I go to an event and I have to watch the event on the Jumbotron, I might just as well be home watching it on my 200-inch projection screen. I need to be in the front row or at least the floor seats watching it. And our seats for the NBA game were like, what?
Money bags. And why are you stressed about financing this property? Why don't you just pay for it in cash?
Well, we still got to come up with $800,000, right?
But I think we found a way to do it. So thank you for keeping me on track. Yeah. So SBA loan comes in, $80,000. Properties are not optimized, but cash flow is starting to return to pre-pandemic levels. For the first time in my life, I have $70,000 of cash in the bank. Now, I've had $70,000 in cash in the bank before, but it was all earmarked saving up for the $200,000 I need to buy a $1 million row house to take down as a rental.
Every time we buy a new property for Ron, we get that down payment up. We spend every last dime to get the next property and then start repeating. So constantly starting at zero to bring that savings up. And right, we're not buying cheap houses. They're often $200,000 down payments.
Right. So we're always on the edge of getting this to work. And then so I thought I was going to have to put 20% down when I bought the College Park property that I bought in 2018. But the terms of the commercial loan from Eastern Savings Bank is 25% down. That's $50,000. I already have I've exhausted every avenue. How can I come up with $50,000 more? And then also a condition of the commercial loan is they want to see reserves. So now,
it's even more money.
How am I going to have $100,000 in reserves? You're depleting all my money from this. So I will say one other thing. I always talk about going to zero when we buy a property. And this is not recommended, obviously. But I was at a point where my properties were cash flowing and I had my government job. So I was able to bank. And this is also when I still had the poverty mentality, when I was delaying gratification and my expenses were like $2,000 a month. So I was able to bank $10,000 a month. So even though I was going to zero, in 5 months, I was going to have $50,000 back in the bank. And that 5 months it took us to get allowed
income or that savings to build up.
That's how I could come up with $50,000 more in down payment money. And I'll also say one last thing about the going to zero. People keep their cash fund as their emergency fund. Not only was I able to build up a depleted emergency cash fund quickly, but I had a HELOC the whole time. So I had a $30,000 HELOC on my little condo. So, there was my emergency money.
Yeah.
If the roof blew off one of my properties and insurance didn't cover it, that's how I was going to pay for that. So
lines of credit can be very important during times of catastrophe, right?
And I really think that that's the way to go. I mean, it's the way I go. So of course I think it's the right option, but I really think it's the way to go, because if you're sitting on $70,000 in cash or $200,000 in cash, is what it takes to buy one of these, properties in DC, you shouldn't just be keeping it in emergency money. You should be putting it to work. The HELOC is a great emergency fund because I never had to tap into it.
Yeah.
I never had to tap into it for emergency purposes. So you're hedging and self-insuring against an emergency that's never going to happen. And I'm not an economics major, but I think that's what they call opportunity cost, right?
Yeah.
Where you're wasting the opportunity that you could be using that cash. So I was always looking for how could I reinvest this cash when I get to a point that I could, pay for another down payment. So I really think the HELOC strategy, using the HELOC as your emergency cash fund, that's what it is, like break glass in case of emergency. You never have to break the glass for your emergency cash. So why hold that cash and not have it do anything?
Yeah.
Just go take out a HELOC and have that be your emergency cash.
Yeah. So we got the money coming in from SBA. We have $70,000 in the bank.
So now we're up to $150,000.
Okay.
Then I have a HELOC. Because again, I'm a genius. So before I quit my job, what Russell and I did was we put a HELOC on my primary residence, which again, you need to bring your real estate agent to the appraisal so you get the property to appraise for the highest amount, because that affects what your line of credit's going to be. So Russell convinced, persuaded, maybe the appraiser did it on his own, but he valued my property at a very high amount. And this is before the pandemic, before the latest appreciation and whatever.
Yeah, there's a whole process with appraisals I go through, specifically with the types of comps I have, specifically with how I try to interact with the appraiser, what the things I say to him about those comps. I've got a whole process, and as Ron can attest, I've helped Ron with several appraisals now. The process works.
I don't want to sound like Johnny One Note, because I think I brought this up a lot on your podcast, but I can't overstate how important it is to have your real estate agent go to the appraisal, because you don't have to do that, Russell. You don't have to go to an appraisal for a HELOC. I mean, we're not buying, you're getting nothing out of that, but if you know what, if
you're an agent listening, this is what I'm getting out of it, right? Because now it's a couple of years later. Now I'm trying to help you buy the next property, but I've helped set you up for better financial success by helping you earlier, maybe on something I didn't make any money on, right? But now it's it will pay dividends here several years later.
Right. Good point. Excellent point.
It's taking a global view of your relationships, your business, your portfolio, everything. Everything should be this global, holistic view like we were talking about earlier.
Right. Don't be so short-sighted by thinking, oh, well, I'm not going to help this investor client of mine with the appraisal for his HELOC because
ultimately your success is also going to be my success, and maybe I can't see exactly how helping you out right here with something I'm not making money on will help me later, but I know it will.
Right. So
and it will now. It's playing out right now.
Right, because without the 100, so I ended up, because it appraised for so high, I ended up getting a line of credit for $160,000. So the idea for that was originally, before I quit my job, is that I'll have a little, I could be my own bank. I was so sick of all the lenders telling me no all the time. I was like, let me give myself a little line of credit that if I want to buy a condo in Florida for $150,000 when I quit my job and I'm no longer financeable, I could just go buy it with cash and fund it with the HELOC. But because the HELOC, the line of credit is such a large amount of money, I started to think, okay, now I've got $150,000 with the SBA money and my cash. Let's add $160,000 to it.
Now we're up to $310,000.
$310,000. My idea is I keep getting. We bought my forever home for $870,000. I think $869,000, right? Russell, you're better at remembering numbers than I am.
It was somewhere around there, and I know we had substantial closing costs and credit on that too.
Right. So, which, by the way, again, I think I've mentioned this on this podcast before, but I only used $20,000 of my own money. We got so good at, even though I was, always down to the last dollar and questionable on DTI and things like that. By the end, Russell and I had cracked the code and figured it out how to make me lendable, that when I bought my forever home just before I quit my job, I only had to put the $20,000 in escrow money down. I used the HELOC to pay for my down payment. Somehow it didn't affect my DTI enough that I was able to use $160,000 for the down payment, because I had just bought a property months before. So I had depleted all my cash. But we somehow made it work, and I only had to put $20,000 in to buy this $870,000 house.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about that purchase was, so we use Joe Knowles at Caliber Home Loans, I believe, for this purchase.
Also, if we're going to hype Scott, Joseph is
top-notch lender.
If you're listening, Joseph is the man.
But one of the things I loved in that purchase was, so Ron, in doing all these funky transactions, is probably one of the only people I know that's actually read through all the Fannie Mae guidelines on loans. And he finds these weird little things, and Joe knows his shit. He goes, you know what? Every time I talk to Ron, I learn something new about the guidelines.
That's my favorite, real estate financing joke of all time. But Joseph was if you talk about, David Green talks about his core four or whatever, you have to have the real estate agent. That's Russell. You have to have the lenders. If you have a good relationship with the lenders, because they want to.
And here's the thing I think a lot of people overlook. You need multiple lenders because they do different things, right? So Joe's straight conventional, can do creative things in that space, but he didn't do any commercial loans, right? So we need commercial lenders too. And different, right? Different people have different strengths, right? So you need a large lending network. And
what I've learned when you were talking about you're using your assets correctly and whatever. When I say I figured everything out, one of the things I figured out is how, when I busted out of the poverty mentality, I figured out what rich people do. Rich people use their assets to acquire other assets with loans, because loan money is tax-free. And then hopefully that asset you're acquiring, at least in the beginning, is another cash flowing asset. In the end, you buy boats and stuff, yachts, and, crazy multi-million-dollar homes that you never go in 20 other rooms or whatever.
All right, we're going to cut off this conversation here. This conversation went really, really long, like many of ours do. So we're going to continue this conversation next week. But thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the DC Real Estate Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you want to contact the hosts, reach out to them at info@dcrealestatepodcast.com. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you access your podcasts.